So from this, you're moving on to user stories, okay? From the user stories, which will kind of be your task list, you're moving on to estimation, and you're doing this with planning poker. From this, you're moving on to prioritization, which we do with the Moscow technique, which we're going to do next week. This will lead you to creating the product backlog. Yeah? All of this is underpinned, quite obviously, by the design thinking foundations or principles, which are, to the right, the problem, ideate, iterate, prototype. As we've seen, these things are always in play, right? You're always ideating, you're always prototyping, whether it is creating personas, asking questions, narrative, you're always kind of drawing on the idea of creating the problem, of prototyping, iterating, incremental development. So this is always in play, and you're always drawing on your agile goals. Now we're going into Scrum, right? So this one here is where your Scrum is starting. So you're creating your task board, which is your sprint backlog, from your product backlog. So you're going in a sprint, you self-organize, you have your agile roles, and, well, we're coming to this, we're adding this later. So we're doing these sprints, okay, in Scrum. From time after each sprint, we haven't done this, but we're doing a retrospective, which means the team needs to think about how we're doing, right? So each sprint has a task board which we're trying to achieve. We self-organize, we have the roles in play. And now is an important one, because interlocked to this is a design thinking cycle, which means when we're doing this, we're at the same time, we're experimenting, we're building, we're testing. Where are we testing? Oh, we're testing, we're learning, we're evolving our solution. Yeah, so we're doing this as we're sprinting. This one is about how we manage the project. This is about what we're doing. Yeah, so this is what the team does, what we do. What we do, and this is how we manage. Okay? Now, this one here, we're kind of doing this at the beginning to see, are we actually doing Agile? Well, that's kind of a thing that happens there. Communication Agile is actually a principle. The burn down chart goes with the task board. We haven't done this. The time boxing, where do I put the time boxing? It's probably more like a foundational thing. Stand-up we need. Absolutely, we need the stand-ups in the sprint. Agile governance, I don't want this here now. This is changing requirements, they're definitely Agile Foundations. Because these things here, Agile governance, Agile process, they're more to do with how we embed the whole Agile into an organization that isn't quite used to doing Agile. We might be talking about this later in the semester if we get to it. But as you can see, we've done some prioritization. The green ones here, we really want to get done. Some of those yellow ones, or even the pink ones, we're not so sure. The concept, not so important. Put that on the board. So I think that's about how I can see it at the moment, right? You're doing your whole persona thing, getting to know your audience. You're working yourself into a position where you can fill your backlog, and then you do your sprints with your stand-ups, with your task boards, with your roles and your self-organization. We call this Scrum, obviously, and you do your retrospectives, which are to debrief and to get to grips with how does the team work. This is where you reflect on how well did we do with our estimations? How do we improve that? What is our velocity? What can we do to improve our velocity in the next sprint to get better? How can we help each other out in a better way as a team? And while you're doing this, while you're managing your project in that way, you're always trying to iterate and draw on your design thinking principles by, doing small experiments, building something, testing something, learning from this, evolving this. We're calling this, prototyping and incremental development or iterations. So the two interlock, the way you iterate in what you do and the way in which you iterate in how you run your project. So that's the best I can do at this point to give you a complete picture of how these things hang together, okay? And we're going to work on this part here next week, and then we're going to have some videos that we shot at this company here in Sydney, where we're going to talk about how they manage their task boards, how they do their agile roles and their stand-ups. So we get another good look at how this works. And if we get to it, after we've worked our way through this, we're doing another Scrum exercise in a couple of weeks' time. And this will then sort of make sure that we have done all of this in those middle sessions of the course, and then we're ready to hear from some guest speakers about, how Agile works in the film industry and things like that. Okay?
So take a bow. Just one thing real quick. We started off the class by saying this was an interesting decision to combine Agile Project Management and design thinking. And a lot of people kind of raised their eyebrows and said, what the heck is going on? Those are two different things. But the argument we've been putting forward that now becomes really, really clear. You can talk about how we manage, but if you leave out the bottom half, what are you doing? You're managing. But what are you managing? You're just managing. But if you just do design thinking without some kind of structure, and this isn't the only structure, but it happens to fit really well, you can't just do design thinking without some way of orienting a group that's working, and this happens to be Agile is a very good way. So these two things are interlocked, that almost are impossible to separate, or at least that's what we are presenting. It would be a challenge to try to separate these out. But to think about management without doing something is kind of incoherent. So I hope this makes it clear why we put these together. The technique of personas and user stories and narratives is common to both. It's in both. So there's an overlap here, so we might as well present it. So this is a nice picture of why we're doing the unit the way we're doing it, and what you really can think about from, if you're on the managerial side or on the design side, how these two things really go together, and being good at each is definitely a benefit to you. So
that's it.